Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a fun spin on all the news you need to know about. I cannot believe that we are here at this point in time, and we're going to get to all things in the news in just a second. But of course, first, my name is Jacob Paveo, and I come to you each and every Wednesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, fresh for you to download the entire world around. Thank you all so much for your support. Of course, if you've been following the show for a while, you'll know that earlier this year, I had a whole bunch of exams and stuff to write, which went well, I will add, but had to take time away from the show. And of course, in the podcasting world, that is imminent doom, where we went from, roughly a few dozen, upwards of a few hundred listeners every week down to like none, because that's what happens when you don't put out an episode for a podcast for a few weeks, but slowly climbing our way back up. So it's very nice to see all the support. Thank you all so much for coming back each and every week. Of course, if you haven't done so already, you could subscribe to the podcast. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the show. Thank you for checking it out. You could share the show with your friends and family. Leave a review anywhere, and I will find it. There are websites that help me do so. I'll read all your reviews. And, of course, the better the star rating or whatever scale it is that you happen to be using, depending on the podcast service you're listening on, better reviews, of course, help us show up higher in the algorithms. It's been a while since we were featured on Spotify, but probably because I'm talking a lot about war and shit lately, like, it's probably not going to help. And guess what? This week, not going to be much better, because obviously they're trying to be very careful about what shows they promote in their feeds, which is totally understandable. But at the same time, like, this is just what I want to talk about. So whatever, right? We're not featured on the Canadian Spotify whatever it was, like this week to listen to section. That's all right. We'll get there again soon when there are perhaps less serious things to discuss. To start off this week, though, I have some personal stuff to bring up because I'm really excited. You may notice, you may not. I don't really know. To me, it sounds the same, but maybe it sounds different to you. But I, of course, here at the castle, which is more like a small outpost where I reside. The studio is essentially complete. We're not perfectly soundproofed yet. A little bit more work to do. I have to add a second exterior door. And actually, I think that's like the last big thing we've got to do. And then maybe some soundproofing stuff in the room. But otherwise, we are mostly where we want to be in regards to the studio. So the next thing I had to buy was I'm updating all of my recording stuff. Not only, of course, do I record podcasts, but I'm also a drummer. So I have a few years ago completely got rid of all the recording stuff that I had for drums because I really didn't have anywhere to use it. But I am slowly building up my repertoire again. And now the last thing I need to buy, I need to mic the room for drums. So that's going to be the last purchase. But about 2 weeks ago, I got a new audio interface, which is pretty exciting. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically a mixer or a soundboard is what you would probably call it. But it's, of course, much bigger because so far I just use little small machines that allow for vocals to be transformed to be digitized, but now I have a beautiful setup. I'm going from being capable of recording 2 mics. Really, I could get away with 4, but now I'm going to 2, 4. Now I have 6 mic capabilities from 1 unit, and then, of course, I have other units, so I can expand it to 8 mics, which is awesome, plus a whole lot of plug-inable instruments like guitars and stuff can be recorded on this. So I'm so hyped. And there are these super fun voice effects that I'm really hyped about. Not that I'm going to use these, because like this, right now, it should sound like I'm in some weird room. But we're going to turn that off for now. But yeah, there's like a whole bunch of cool stuff that I can do with the vocals. I just started playing with it this week. I've had a lot going on, so unfortunately, it's been sitting in a box since it arrived, but I just pulled it out. I don't even know where I'm going to put it. There are so many wires around me right now because this is the first time I'm actually recording with it, because I was just playing around with the machine itself, but this is the first time that I've actually got it plugged in to record. Yeah, another thing I'm just going to update because he just made a bunch of noise. I talked about my dog, Benny, being sick last week. Got an appointment with the vet. He has an ear infection. We know that. He appears to have some sort of skin infection. They say it shouldn't be contagious, which is good because that means my skin's not going to get infected, nor any other dogs he chooses to play with. But yeah, he's going to be seeing the vet on Tuesday next week. So hopefully good things to come from that. Spend a bit of money. Okay, stop scratching. Go away. Go away. You're making noise. And yeah, so we will keep everyone updated on that because someone randomly asked me, and I was like, oh, I guess I should bring that up again and let everyone know how he's doing. So shout out to you. Into the news this week, of course, you could probably tell judging by the title, we are going to be talking still about the Russian war in Ukraine. It's crazy that we're here. That's how I started the show off because that's really how I feel right now. It's crazy that Ukraine did not fall to Russia. Like, that's something that I was wrong about. A lot of people were wrong about. It's crazy that Russia has kept up this long because we really didn't think that would happen. We thought they would, slice off a little bit of the country and then, defend what they had taken at a certain point is what we thought was going to happen. Well, now we're in this counteroffensive where Ukraine is slowly taking back the city of Kherson, and they're taking over all these villages outside of it, and by all reports, seem to be doing fairly well. Russia's downplaying how much they've done. But the thing is, you just have to realize that even to take 1 or 2 small villages back from the Russian military is absolutely insane. And a big part of it comes down to something that I discussed early on in the conflict, which is that the Ukrainian people are not happy under Russian occupation. So there are areas of Ukraine where it seems like the population is more supportive of Russia, specifically in the more eastern parts, the northeastern parts of the country. They're like Crimea being the primary area where it seems like a vast, maybe not vast, but a majority of the population actually prefers to live under Russian rule as opposed to Ukrainian, or even just their own government structure as opposed to Ukraine. However, all these other areas are like Ukraine proper. There's been no conflict before this. There's been no debate. They haven't tried to join Russia. They haven't tried to break away from Ukraine, which they could have done. They could have just joined up with Crimea and pushed the Ukrainian border further back, but they chose not to. Instead, they fought against the Crimean occupation. So it's this weird point where now, all of the people living in these areas don't support this occupied regime, which means that when their country starts moving back in, the people are going to support their their countrymen, and they're going to support these uprisings and whatnot, and it makes it very unstable. And that's why we talked about, occupying. When we look at what it takes for a large country like Russia to occupy another nation, we need to look at really the Second World War, because that's the last time that it was done properly. And when I say properly, I mean it was done for an extended period of time, multiple years. Both we saw the Nazis occupying much of Western Europe, all the way through, all of Western Europe except the United Kingdom, right, was occupied. But the thing is, they had the structure of the SS, which, of course, was a brutal police force with absolute power, and just, a horrible, horrible institution, but with hundreds of thousands of officers, and then underneath them, hundreds of thousands of military personnel, all managing these local populations to suppress uprisings, arrest and kill people who attempted to organize these sort of things. And then afterwards, we saw in both Germany and Japan specifically, the U.S. in Japan and Germany, or I suppose West Germany, and then in East Germany, we saw Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, have a successful occupation through to basically 1990, when Germany was allowed to, restate their own formal government. And that, again, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of military personnel, not in conflict, but in essentially maintenance. Hundreds of thousands of military personnel maintaining civility and peace, and arresting anyone, again, with ideas of uprising and whatnot. They weren't killing people. I believe, actually, in East Germany, there was capital punishment. I don't believe there was in West Germany, but I could be totally wrong about that. The U.S. could have been overseeing capital punishment in West Germany at that time, for uprisings and whatnot. But the point is, that's what you have to do. You have to invest tons of military personnel to maintain these regions. And in Ukraine, they're so vast and so sparse that it's not like Germany, which was a lot of cities with some farmland. This is a lot of farmland with some cities. And it's totally different because there's so much space for people to gather. It's obviously more difficult with technology and drone surveillance and whatnot from the Russian government, or the Russian side, I should say, and the Ukrainian side. It makes it very difficult to plan uprisings and join in groups and train in groups in secret, because there's drones flying around looking for you. So it does make things much more difficult, but it's still possible. It's such a huge area that they're occupying that it's surprising that the Ukrainian military is able to fight back this hard. It is surprising. Just technologically, they are the inferior military here by numbers and technology, but technology being come on, it's 2022, right? We know what's happening here. You could have a military of one that can destroy a military of 1 million because that one person just has insane access to technology, right? It's kind of why, North Korea is not intimidating because they have one of the largest standing militaries in the world. That's not what makes them intimidating. What makes them intimidating is the fact that they have nuclear weapons. China's the same thing. No one cares how many people China has in their military. What are they going to do? Ship a fucking million people to invade the United States? No, that's not where the threat lies. It lies in their technology, their nuclear capabilities, their rocket capabilities, all that sort of stuff. That's what matters nowadays. And it's proving to be very true because Ukraine's military, though, extremely small, but as we discussed last week, the way that they're using these technologies to activate long-range strikes, which shouldn't be possible, but they're just being so smart about how they're using especially their drone technology and their drone capabilities, and just pushing it to its limits, and surprising Russia at every corner, taking out these munitions depots and airports and whatnot in ways that they shouldn't be able to. But they're stretching their technological capabilities so much so that it's surprising and overtaking the Russian military, which is it's crazy to see. But ultimately, right now, there's a ton of ongoing battles for Russian-occupied Ukrainian land that the Ukrainian military is moving towards. Specifically, as mentioned, around Kherson, there's a formal front line that has shown up, and they're attempting to retake these Russian-held areas. But because that's all ongoing, I'm not really going to talk too much more about it or about anything specifically, because land can move back and forth and battles can change very rapidly. But as of right now, that's kind of the story. Is they're attempting to push the front lines back towards Russia. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky did say that, again, he reiterated they are planning on chasing the Russians back to their border. That's the wording that he used, and that's what they're trying to do. So, but otherwise, when it comes to the specifics, when you're listening to this, if you're interested, you could look up exactly where the front lines are, what cities they're fighting over, but it changes hour to hour. So I don't think it really makes sense for me to discuss what's happening at this specific point in time, because even by the time I edit this podcast and post it, even if you listen to it right at 1 p.m., it's probably going to have changed at least somewhat. So, but still lots to talk about. So, of course, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN's watchdog, essentially, for nuclear power plants, they are, of course, on their way to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, which is currently occupied by Russia. So this is just a quick write-up from CNN that says a team from the UN's nuclear watchdog has arrived in the Ukrainian-controlled city of Zaporizhzhia ahead of a planned visit to the Russian-occupied nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. The team is expected to visit the plant on Thursday, following recent shelling at the facility and mounting fears of nuclear disaster. So, at this specific point in time, we know that they have arrived in the village where, basically the only people who are still living there are the families and the individuals who work at the nuclear power plant facility, and then a lot of Russian military that have moved in. And so the UN agency made their way from Kiev on, I believe, Monday, all the way there, evidently safely. We haven't heard otherwise. And they're now sort of posted up in the village, and they're going to be going to the facility tomorrow. Now, there's a lot of back and forth about what's going to happen. So the inspectors from the UN's nuclear watchdog will visit Zaporizhzhia power plant for, quote, a few days ahead of the delegation. A few days, the head of the delegation told reporters on Wednesday. So that's from the UN delegation itself, said they'll be there for a few days. Quote, the mission will take a few days, and if we're able to establish a permanent presence or a continued presence, then it will be prolonged. But this first segment, so to speak, is going to take a few days, end quote. Director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, said. And Rafael Grossi himself is on this tour, which is a very significant event because, of course, he's the leader of a United Nations, the Atomic Energy Agency for the United Nations, and he is in a war zone. That's how significant this is. However, it gets a little bit more complicated. So this is a second story from CNN, which is written just moments later, that says the agency plans to establish a permanent presence at the power plant. He made the comments before the 14 members of his team left for Zaporizhzhia, and they've now arrived and are expected to try and visit the plant Thursday. Asked whether his plan was to establish a permanent mission there, he said, yes, we're going to do exactly that. However, it's not clear under what conditions they would leave its personnel at the facility, which is currently occupied by Russian forces. Both the Ukrainians and Russians have accused each other of shelling. And then a top Russian diplomat said they welcome the plan to leave a presence at the plant. This is Mikhail Ulyanov, Russia's representative to the international organizations in Vienna, who wrote on Telegram, quote, "The IAEA Director General Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi confirmed today his plans to establish permanent presence of agencies specialists at the ZNPP, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia welcomes this intention." However, earlier today, when the guy who Russia implanted as mayor of this region, or like the local political leader, I don't know if they're specifically calling him mayor, but the politician who is running the Russian-occupied region of Zaporizhzhia said they will have access to the plant for 1 day. Now, he's obviously a military dude, and if they want to kick them out, like, the IAEA can put up a fight, but like they're gonna have to leave if they want them to leave. So the local leader in the region is having a very different approach to what Moscow is saying, and of course what the United Nations is saying. So that's going to be interesting moving forward. I don't think anything bad will happen to this group, because it's super important to note that Russia still abides by the IAEA for their own nuclear facilities, as well as like Iran and China. Like, everyone does, because it only makes sense, because nuclear power, it's not like nuclear weapons. Like, the isotopes that are used cannot be made into nuclear weaponry. They've essentially degraded beyond the point where it could be used to make a nuclear weapon. It doesn't mean they're not dangerous, but it just doesn't. It can't be built into a nuclear bomb. So that means that nuclear power is accessible by far more countries than nuclear weapons are. And so all the countries who do have nuclear power plants work together through the United Nations. There's actually not much drama here, because everyone's like totally cool with the fact that, like, whatever, like, if you want to produce nuclear power, we're cool with that. You just have to do it safely. We don't want another Chernobyl, which, of course, Chernobyl was a Soviet Union power plant. Happens to also be in Ukraine, literally on the other side of the river system from Zaporizhzhia. This is on the Dnipro River, and the Dnipro meets the Pripyat river. I think Pripyat's the name of both the river and the town. I could be wrong. But either way, the two river systems meet in the middle of Ukraine. And so one river fed, of course, the doomed to fail power plant of Chernobyl, and now in the far northeast, and now in the southeast, we have, it's the northwest along the border with Hungary. And now in the southeast of the country, we have Zaporizhzhia, which is, of course, under attack. So hopefully, I keep saying this, we don't have nuclear disasters. All the experts are saying, even if one of the reactors are hit directly by nuclear shelling, that they're built to withstand. They're built to withstand that sort of impact. It should be fine. The big problem appears to be that the facility, just like every other nuclear facility, needs access to the power grid to run their water pumps and stuff like that. That's, of course, how they keep cool. And it takes months, if not years, to fully cool a nuclear reactor core. Like, you can't just turn it off and then by tomorrow, like, it's all good. It doesn't work like that, because the radiation just keeps happening. Like, the reaction in the reactor cores just keeps going, even if you can't just like pull the stuff out, right? You got to let it do its thing, which takes months and months after you've stopped the reaction from happening to properly cool. And if you don't do so, of course, then you have a meltdown. That's what happened in Chernobyl. That's also what happened in Japan at Fukushima. Those are nuclear meltdowns. And then in Chernobyl, the meltdown led to a nuclear explosion, unfortunately. But here, the problem appears to be that because of all the fighting around the area, it's happened twice now where the power lines which supply the facility were damaged and power was lost, meaning they had to go to backup diesel generators, which is fine, but of course that brings up two issues. One is they could run out of diesel if this happens a lot or for a long duration of time. And two is that the diesel generators could be hit, and then obviously there would be no saving that. I have a feeling the generators are probably protected underground and whatnot, but it's still an issue that could, of course, happen. So, hopefully with the agency there, the conflict in the region comes to a halt. That's definitely what they're hoping for. However, reports are that there is still conflict in the area, but the city that they're actually staying in Zaporizhzhia, doesn't currently have conflict that we're aware of. Things could change at any moment, but hopefully it maintains as it is now. And now the last thing that I want to talk about is it's a story out of the UK, but this is happening everywhere in the world. So we saw, finally, for the first time since the conflict started, a boat with grain arrived in the Horn of Africa from Ukraine. So there was an agreement. Russia is allowing certain ships to dock and load with grain from Ukraine to go to the Horn of Africa as part of the I believe the UN food supply program, because there's massive drought right now across the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, just to make matters worse, when grain is not available from Ukraine, which supplies more grain to Africa than any other country in the world, they also have a massive drought this year. So things are not good. There have been hundreds of thousands of cases of starvation, many leading to death across the Horn of Africa, which is like the area of Ethiopia, I do believe. But it's a wide swath of the driest areas of Africa where food growth is already difficult. So you take away what little rain they do get, it makes it impossible to grow food, and they rely on these supplies specifically from Ukraine. So they're now able to deliver that grain. However, the grain from Ukraine that would normally be entering our markets, as well as all of their other crops, right? Sunflower seeds, for example, and just fruits and vegetables and whatnot, are not available. So globally, food prices, of course, as I'm sure you've already noticed, are rising. So again, this is out of the United Kingdom, and posted by CNN from Tim Ireland. And it reads, the price of food in the United Kingdom has increased at the, quote, highest inflation rate since August 2008, end quote, as the country feels the impact of the war in Ukraine, according to the British Retail Consortium and Nielsen IQ Index. Overall, quote, food inflation accelerated strongly to 9.3% in August, up from 7% in July, the highest inflation rate since August 2008, end quote, the report released Wednesday stated. Mounting cost pressures up and down supply chains means shop price inflation hit a new high in August. The war in Ukraine and consequent rise in the price of animal feed, fertilizer, wheat, and vegetable oils continued to push up food prices, the chief executive Helen Dickinson said. Fresh food inflation in particular surged to its highest level since 2008, and products such as milk, margarine, and crisps, or chips, of course, saw the biggest rises. Fresh food is now up 10.5% from 8% in July. The rise in shop prices is playing into wider UK inflation, which some analysts are predicting could top 18% in 2023. The situation is bleak for both consumers and retailers. Now, anecdotally, holy hell, it is becoming so expensive to go grocery shopping. insane costs. I live alone, right? My dog doesn't eat people food. He does if I don't eat it. I give him leftovers or whatever's left, lying on my plate. But he doesn't eat people food. It's just me. And I easily spend $120 every single week on groceries alone. And usually I go out to eat at least once or twice a week. And I'm still paying $120, and I'm like not throwing food out. So I have no idea. Like, I've spoken to families of 3, families of 4, who are paying upwards of like $350, $400 a week right now for groceries here in Canada. It's absolutely insane, and it is completely driven by this. To make matters worse, fuel prices are adding to these costs, right? Because they have to pay to get food delivered to these grocery stores and whatnot. Transport's a big part of this. And unfortunately, fuel prices are continuing to rise. And yesterday evening, I believe, the Nord Stream pipeline was shut down again and has not started delivering oil from Russia to Europe. Once again, it was an announced shutdown last week. No word yet on when it will reopen. This is rather unusual. They keep shutting the pipeline down for a few days at a time. Who knows how long this will take? A lot of experts believe it's a reaction to, the Western sanctions on Russian oil and Russian goods in general. But, I mean, it's Russia's oil. Like, they don't want to sell it, they're not going to sell it, right? So, luckily, the United Kingdom, for the first time, I think, ever since we started tracking this information, used no Russian oil in all of June. We talked about this last week, so that's awesome. But, of course, Germany relies heavily on Russian oil still. So, unfortunately, they're not getting access to that oil right now. None of Europe is. And that's just going to increase gas prices the entire world around. It's gonna spike here soon. We haven't seen it yet, but it will, because we're going to be our supply from places like Saudi Arabia is going to decrease, as well as the Canadian supply might be shipped to Europe. So it's just like across the board, we end up in a position where it's not good. It's really, really not good. And I don't know how people are doing it. I really don't. Like, talking with people that, have full-size families to feed, and it's just like, man, it's gone from, $200 a week to $400 a week since the pandemic started, because the pandemic was really bad for inflation, and now this is almost worse, because it's like, 10% on top of the increase we've already seen is like a 30% increase from where we started. So, math is not fun when we're talking about compounding inflation. But I really don't think this is going to change. A lot of people have come to me with these sort of questions for like budgeting and whatnot. Like, when does this come down? Like, with mortgage rates increasing, that's supposed to offset inflation. It's like, well, yes and no. It depends. I don't think it's going to work. I don't see it happening, because of the way the mortgage system is set up right now. Is we have businesses buying more mortgages than individuals. Investing businesses and investment companies are the ones who are renting out most of the houses you see on the market. So they have enough money where they don't care. So they can buy a house at, a 10 or 15% interest rate. They're just going to charge you more for rent. So your rent's going to go up. Your food is still going to go up. And like, nothing's going to change. So I'm basically telling people right now to like budget for further increases. If that means spending less on extravagances right now because things are already difficult for you, then that's the case. If it means trying to increase your income in some way, like, that's kind of where we're headed, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I am a financial expert, so it sucks to say, but it is what it is. So yeah, I'm thinking that the inflation rates, driven especially by this war, are going to be really bad moving into winter. it's going to get a lot worse because the cost of war in the winter is so much higher that we are going to see fuel prices, I think, skyrocket because the amount of fuel consumption to keep a war front running in extreme cold is just insane, and that is what we're going to see happen. So I would expect it to get worse long before it gets better. Yeah, thank you for tuning in to the show this week. Thank you for sticking with it through to the end. As I said at the beginning, if it was your first time checking the show out, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed your time here, and I hope to see you, or perhaps I hope for you to hear me again in the future, of course, each and every Wednesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find all of the links to my social medias down below in wherever the description happens to be on your podcasting platform. Don't forget, tell your friends. You can take a screenshot of the show playing on your phone and post it online. Easy way to let everyone know what you're listening to. And yeah, until next time, hopefully we stay radiation-free, or relatively radiation-free. And I bid you all to keep on laughing and keep on learning.